Okay.
All right, good morning, folks. Thank you for coming to this presentation of mine. My name is Shurtleff. I am the co-founder and director of Camp Constitution. We are a New Hampshire-based charitable trust. We run a week-long family camp, which is coming up in July. And we have weekend retreats. And right now, as I'm speaking, our latest retreat is happening in Alton, New Hampshire. And we also have, you can visit our table. We have all kinds of resources there for homeschoolers and for educators. We have the Samuel Blumenfeld Archive. Who knows the name of Sam Blumenfeld? You should know his name if you're a homeschooler. He's one of the first to point out the problem with reading in our country. And he made the conclusion that it was done deliberately. And he dedicated his life, he died at 15, to introducing phonics into schools, and then eventually private schools and then homeschools. So he's considered one of the pioneers of the homeschool movement. So this little presentation is called Presidents of the United States. So how many people are all boned up on the presidents? Right? We all know about it. Now, first thing you want to do is, I don't see it too well. How is a president chosen? Who can become president? How long does a president serve, and how can a president be removed? What are the powers and duties of a president? Now, we're going to have an election in November. How is a president elected? Anybody know? I know we get some very intelligent people in that back row that I can see. Yes, sir.
You vote.
You vote. You have to be. How old do you have to be to vote? And yes, sir.
18.
18. You have to be 18. So the person with the most votes becomes president of the United States. Is that how it works?
Sure.
That's not how it works, does it? Not in this country, no. Thankfully, we have something that's known as the Electoral College. And now, in the Constitution, by the way, I have plenty of copies of pocket constitutions at the table, so please get down there and avail yourself. So in Article 2 is where you find the powers and duties of a president. And by the way, you've heard the term, the president is the most powerful man in the free world. You ever hear that? It's not in the Constitution. That's not his duty to be the most powerful man in the free world. You know, it's not kind of a scary thought. Our current president is the most powerful man in the free world. So it says here in Article 2, each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives. Now, how many senators and representatives do you have in New Hampshire at the federal level, not the state level? Oh, come on, it's not a trick question. Each state has how many senators? Two. And the members of the House are based on population. It's like 700,000 or so per congressman or House of Representatives. So you have two. That means you have 4 electoral votes. Maine is unique, though, because they have a split. So in most states, it's winner take all. So the person who gets the popular vote in Maine, or in most states, they'll win all of the electoral votes. And today, the electoral voters are chosen by the political parties, usually at their state convention. And most people have no idea who they are. You know, they're the ones that actually cast the ballot on your behalf for the president. So I'll continue here. Equal to the number of representatives to which the state may be entitled. But no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed elector. So that means that a member of Congress cannot be an elector, a member of electoral, or somebody who is Secretary of State, or even somebody who works at some capacity at the federal level. They don't qualify to be an elector from any state. So that's found in Article 2, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution. Most people don't know this. Most people do not know the proper way how they're chosen. Now, why did our founders give us this thing called which became known as the Electoral College? Well, at the convention, there was small states, and when you think about states being small, not by size but by population. So the states with small populations realized that if they didn't do it this way, then they would have no say whatsoever. It would be the big states who would pretty much control everything. Today, if we had popular elections, and that's all we had, California, New York, and a few other states would pretty much control everybody, every state. And it wouldn't work out too well. So Article 2, Section 3 was changed by the 12th Amendment. Electors would meet in their states and vote for two persons. One at least shall not be an inhabitant of the same state. The 12th Amendment, electors would cast two ballots, one for president, one for vice president. So up until 1803, I think, when the 12th Amendment was passed, you'd vote for two, and it'd be the first place would be president, second place would be the vice president. And we had a problem under Jefferson and Aaron Burr. They didn't get along too well. Some of us remember Aaron Burr, there was a duel and all that. I won't get into that. But so that's when I think one reason why they decided to have two separate ballots for president and vice president, as opposed to runner-up, second place. And by the way, who was our first vice president? Anybody know? Adams, that's right. Thank you. Okay. Now, qualifications for president. Are you qualified to be president right now?
No.
How come?
I am only 7.
Only 7. Would you vote for him, even though he's 7? Probably would when he's 30. You have to be 35 years of age. Now, 35 years of age is still relatively young, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm 65, so I think it's very young kind of thing. I used to be 35, and I thought I was old when I was 35. But in 35 years of age, back in 1787, that's pretty old. The average life expectancy was what, about 45, 50? So that's not bad. I think we should leave it the way it is. I don't think we should have an amendment to change that. I think it's fine that way. A natural-born citizen. That means they have to be born in the United States or in a territory, or even under, say, the U.S. flag. So let's, for example, let's say Mom and my dad was in the Army, and Mom was was over there in Germany, and so I'm born in Germany. Am I a U.S. citizen? Well, I'm born under what we would consider the U.S. flag, so I would be considered a natural-born citizen because I was not from Germany and born in Germany. And why do you think they wanted to have natural-born citizens as opposed to foreign-born citizens? Yeah.
So they couldn't. I forgot what I was.
Well, no, that's good. And you can guess. You don't have to. It doesn't have to be a textbook answer. Well, if you're born in another country and even raised in another country, you might share a worldview that's different from our country. By the way, there are plenty of foreign-born people that would make great presidents, I think. But I think we should stick with that one. I think we should stick with natural-born citizen. Now, when the Constitution was first written, there were some people that were born before the Constitution or the Declaration. They qualified. So even if they were born in Scotland or England, they would still. But when that group died out, then after that it was natural-born citizens. And now the third qualification is live in the United States for 14 years. So let's say I'm born here in the United States, but my father and mother, they just loved England. And I spent all my time in England. So I come back, I'm 40 years old. I want to run for president. But I probably kind of think like a member of the royal family. I might have a different worldview. So even though I'm born here, I'm raised in another country, and I might have the values of that country, as opposed to the values of this country. And that's why they did it that way. And I think it was great that they did it that way. So how long does a president serve? Anybody know? What's the term for a president? As long as he wants, right? As long as he controls the army, and he can sit there as long as he wants, right? Well, it used to be in the Constitution, in Article 2, it's 4-year term. George Washington served 2 4-year terms, and then he voluntarily stepped down. They used the term, he set a precedent, the president set a precedent. And he thought that he could have been there as long as he wanted. But he thought that if that happened, he would become more of a king or a dictator. And I think it was one of the officials in Germany said that him doing that made him the greatest man in the world. That not too many people relinquish power willingly. And he did. He did it twice. He was the head of the Continental Army. They had just beat Britain. And he's the general. I've got all the soldiers. Man, I got it up the country's mine. He resigned his commission and went back to Mount Vernon. Not too many, historically, not too many people do that. That's why I consider him the greatest American ever born on this continent. And you should really learn about this great man, George Washington. George Washington. I just saw a documentary about the battle or the retreat from Brooklyn Heights. The army could have been wiped out. It should have been wiped out. 9,000 men, the British had 3 times that many, and they rode in the middle of the night while they had watchfires. The British thought they were still going to, those guys sacrificed their lives to maintain those watchfires. Washington was the last man, the last boat to leave. But a big fog rolled in. This was in the summertime when you didn't really have fog. The fog was so bad you couldn't see 12 inches in front of you. Was that God? And every soldier was able to retreat, not one killed, across the river and fight for another day. Incredible. They don't teach that in the government schools, by the way. So, how can a president be removed? Death,
Yes.
right? Die.
Yeah,
Okay,
pretty
that's most likely. We've had a few presidents that died in office. Some were assassinated. Resignation, and we only had one that resigned. Anybody know who that man was? Anybody know?
Richard Nixon.
Richard Nixon. See, a lot of people think he was impeached, but he was about to be impeached. They didn't actually file impeachment, and then he decided to resign. And he said, basically, they won't have me to kick around anymore. Impeachment and removal by 2/3 vote in the Senate. So the House of Representatives, by a simple majority, votes to impeach. And then the Senate, and impeachment is like an indictment. If you have an indictment, let's say, you know, there's a grand jury, they indict me for some horrible crime. That doesn't mean I'm found guilty. It just means there's enough evidence to bring forth a trial. And the prosecutor says, oh, I'm going to nail this guy, you know, this right-wing extremist, on, talking about the Constitution, young people can't have that. We'll charge him with this and we'll stick with him. But the other way, the 25th Amendment, which was passed, I think, in the late 50s, in the 60s. Vice President and a majority of the cabinet members can declare the President unable to hold office. And it's a little complicated because then the President can say, oh, I can, and then it has to go to a vote in the House, but it's a little confusing. That's never been invoked, by the way. Although we've heard about it, they wanted to invoke it when Trump was president. And by the way, Trump was impeached twice. Sometimes impeachments are politically motivated, not really based on law. And I believe, in my opinion, that his impeachments were politically motivated. And he did survive the impeachments. Now, we've heard the term I mentioned earlier that the president is the most powerful man in the free world. That's not what the Constitution says. The Constitution gives the president very few and defined powers. And some of the things are not really powers but duties. So, Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and the militia of the several states when called into actual service. So the Maine, well, there's not really a militia. It should be a militia. It's called the National Guard, and that's another topic. So right now, the Maine militia or National Guard serves under the direction of the governor. The president can call the National Guard out. Sometimes he has to get permission from the governor, depending on the mission itself, if it's within the state. But he can he can send them all over the world too, unfortunately. Grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States. And that's done on kind of a regular basis. So you could be found guilty of a crime at the federal level, not the state level, and the president can give you a reprieve. And a pardon is like it never happened. You know, it's the difference, a reprieve or a pardon. Make treaties with the advice and consent of 2/3 of the Senate. So he makes a treaty, but he still needs the Senate approval, 2/3, which is a high threshold. Appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Superior Court with a majority vote of the Senate. So he still needs permission. So he can appoint somebody who, any of you ever watched the hearings they have? Some of them, you watch Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana? He's funny. He's got this southern, he's like a country woodsman, but he's a brilliant guy. And he asks these people simple questions. These people are judges, and they're going to be appointed to a federal judgeship. What does Article 3 of the Constitution do for us? What's Article 5? And they have no idea. And they're supposed to be judges that know the Constitution. Fill vacancies that may happen during the recess of the Senate by granting commissions which shall expire at the end of the next session. So, for example, let's say the Secretary of State decides to resign or passes away, and Senate is not in session, so he will appoint somebody temporarily until the Senate convenes. give from time to time a State of the Union address to Congress. Now, do we ever watch a State of the Union address? I can't bear to watch. The last 3 years, I've watched like 5 minutes of it, turned it off. He doesn't have to give one every year in January. It says from time to time. Washington gave the first one, and it was a speech. He didn't actually get up there. He wrote it out. And the famous farewell address. How many of you studied George Washington's farewell address? One person, great. Everybody, as you get a little older, every hand should go up. That's an incredible, you know, it used to be taught in all the schools up until maybe the 1920s. And one of the things he said is, have nothing to do with permanent foreign entanglements. And he talked about morality and virtue are essential. In other words, godliness is essential. You can't have freedom if you can't maintain the republic without having a sense of godliness. So that's pretty simple. That's not a whole lot of powers, right? Here's a few more. Recommend to Congress measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. So he can't pass a bill, can he? He said, here's a bill, you better pass it. He can recommend you do something, right? Convene both houses or either of them on extraordinary occasions. It doesn't happen very often, but sometimes we got to get the budget done. There might be a war brewing, and we need to get together. He can adjourn Congress. Isn't that nice? I like to adjourn Congress. Hey guys, don't show up for the next couple of years. We'll be fine without you, right? Receive ambassadors and public ministers. So I know what's there. You see him at the White House all the time. Different officials. Commission all officers. That would be military. So he's the one that actually signs the commission, even for lieutenants, and you know that's what he does. Take care that the laws are executed or enforced. That's, I think, the most important job he has. And our current president is not doing that with most of the laws. He's not executing them. He's aiding and abetting their breaking. All bills passed by Congress must be signed by the president. If he vetoes a bill, it can be overturned by 2/3 of the vote. There's also something called a pocket veto. Anybody know what that means? It doesn't mean like he vetoes it. It means he just doesn't sign it. And then if the Congress goes out of session, the bill dies. I think there's so many days. I think it's 10 days. He has 10 days to sign it. And if he doesn't sign it, it's considered that. But if Congress is out of session, the bill dies if he doesn't sign it. So it's called a pocket. It's like he said, I'll just put this bill in my pocket, you know, and I won't let's sign it. And there are some bills that a president may veto that are overridden, but not too many. So where do we find the powers and duties of the President of the United States? Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution, right? Say it, everyone say it. Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution. Where do we find the powers and duties of members of the Congress? Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution. There was a lady running for Congress in Lynchburg, Virginia. Some of my girls go down there, students down there. And it was in front of a minor league baseball game a few years ago. I went to the game, and she's passing on her little flyer. So I thought I had some fun with her. I said, where do you find the duties of a member of the House of Representatives? She didn't know what I was talking about. So I said, well, where do you find the job description of a member of the House? So you get elected, you certain things that you can do and you cannot do. She said to me, online? Online. You can find it online, but where? You know, she had no idea. She's running for Congress. And she had no idea, and again, most people have no idea. And you imagine having a job but you can give yourself a pay raise, and your bosses don't even know who you are? What a great job. And you're always working against their interest, and you still get a pay raise? I'll tell you. Okay, first president. Now, this is like a trivia question, right? Well, Washington wasn't really the first president. So to clear that up, under the U.S. Constitution, Washington was the first president of the United States. Prior to that, what did we have before the U.S. Constitution? What was the document that was our national constitution? Articles of Confederation. You didn't have an executive branch or a judicial branch. You just had a Congress. See, we had a person that was considered the president of the Congress. And sometimes he was referred to as president of these United States, but he wasn't the same capacity as president of the United States. And it was a man named Congress set up committees to handle problems. At one point, there were 99 committees. A lot of confusion due to committees having overlapping responsibilities. The president of the Articles was secretarial in nature, no true authority over committees. The first president was John Hanson from Maryland. He was unanimously elected. Each president could serve for one-year term. So Hanson was considered the first president under the Articles of Confederation, but not the first president of the United States. Now, Joe Biden is number 46. He's called, his number. Trump is what? 45. But we've only had 45 presidents. So are we using Common Core math here to determine how many presidents we've had? What happened? This guy, Grover Cleveland, he served 2 non-consecutive terms. He served the 22nd and the 20th. Oh, by the way, I talked about presidential terms. I forgot to mention that they passed the 22nd Amendment back in the late 40s, limiting the president to 2 4-year terms. But prior to that, and what president served more than 2 terms? Only one.
Roosevelt.
Franklin Roosevelt, that's right. Okay. So Grover Cleveland served as the 22nd and 24th president. Now, I tell people that to me, in my opinion, he's the last good Democrat. That's been a while since he was not in favor of empire. He encouraged limited government. And there's another trivia question. The only president that physically hanged somebody. You say, wow, it was Grover Cleveland. Not while he was president. He was sheriff of Erie County, New York, and it was his duty, and I think he did it just once, to execute criminals. Vice presidents who became president. So we've had a number of them. John Tyler, after the death of William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison only served about 3 months. He gave like a 3-hour speech, inauguration speech, and he got sick. He never recovered. So the moral of that story is, don't give long speeches, or long classes, right? So it's interesting that I took my son down to Virginia. We visited a lot of the presidential homesteads back about 2008 or 9. John Tyler had a grandson that was still alive. Can you believe that? He married, he had his first wife died, his second wife, he had a lot of children, and they got married or had children late in life too. So he had, imagine a grandson who the president was in the 1840s. That means it was still a pretty young country when you think about it. Millard Fillmore, after the assassination of James Garfield, James Garfield was the only ordained minister that became president. And what catapulted him to fame is his debates on creation versus evolution. Of course, he was in favor of creation. He was also a Civil War general, and he was from Ohio. Andrew Johnson, what happened? Who was Andrew Johnson? He became president after who was assassinated? Abraham Lincoln, 1865. Chester A. Arthur, after the assassination of Teddy Roosevelt. I'm sorry, Chester A. Arthur, I forgot to put, there's a mistake here. I gotta correct that. Theodore Roosevelt, after the assassination of William McKinley. Calvin Coolidge, after the death of Warren Harding. And I'm a fan of Calvin Coolidge. I think he was the last really good Republican. The last one, Trump, was okay, but pretty good. But he was, and you can visit all these homesteads. A lot of these presidents have homesteads that you can visit. Coolidge is in Vermont. And at the time I visited his homestead, he had a son that was still living, John Coolidge. He was in his 90s. Cheese factory, too. He ran a cheese factory. Harry Truman, after the death of Franklin Roosevelt. Lyndon B. Johnson, after the assassination of John Kennedy. And Gerald Ford, after the resignation of Richard Nixon. And who was the only president that ever resigned? Richard Nixon. Only president who was never elected as president or vice president. How did that happen? How did Gerald Ford? Just because he was a nice guy, and they just said, hey, you're a nice guy, you look like a president, you played football in college, we'll make you president, right? Well, the 25th Amendment was used. What happened was Spiro Agnew, he was the vice president under Nixon. He got into some scandal, tax issues. He resigned, so the Senate had to vote for Gerald Ford. In the Senate, Gerald Ford was made vice president, and he assumed the presidency, and then Nixon resigned, and he became the president. Well, I should say he assumed the vice presidency, assumed it, and then when Nixon resigned, he became the president, and then who was the vice president under Ford? Anybody know? Nelson Rockefeller. And Rockefeller, and there was 2 assassination attempts on Ford too. I don't know if some of you, I guess might be all too young to remember that. He was from Grand Rapids, Michigan. And so prior to the 25th Amendment, if a vice president died in office, there was no way to replace him. They did have what they call the Presidential Succession Act, so, and that's changed over the years. So at one time it was the President pro temp of the Senate would become the president if the president died. Then now it's the Speaker of the House. So the Speaker of the House today is not, he's second in line to be president. So if the president dies, it's the vice president, then it's the Speaker of the House. Okay, here we go. Father and son teams. You have the Bushes, right? And they have a place here in Maine. They're not from Maine, but they have a place here in Maine. They can't, where is it? Anybody know? Kenny Bunkport. Yeah, okay. Then you had John Adams, and John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams, he was appointed consul to Russia when he was about 14 years of age. Basically an unofficial ambassador. Imagine that? Who would like to be ambassador to a foreign country at 14? Back then, by the way, you didn't have it. You couldn't just hop on a plane. You had to sail on a boat for months and months and months and to ride. It was not an easy job, I tell you. So these were the two father and son teams, the only ones that we had. Now you had a grandfather-grandson team. William Henry Harrison, he's the one that died very soon actually, I said 3 months, I think it was about a month. And Benjamin Harrison, he was the grandson. He was from Indiana. He was the first guy to bring a Christmas tree into the White House, too. Benjamin Harrison, yeah. Little insignificant presidential trivia. I visited his house in Indianapolis, and that they told us, and they had a Christmas tree there. Presidents that were impeached. Now again, does impeachment mean that he was accused of a crime? It simply means he was what? What's that word I used? Indicted, right? So the House of Representatives indicts. First one was Andrew Johnson. Now he was vetoing a lot of bills that the term radical Republicans, and radical Republicans weren't people like Marjorie Taylor Greene in those days, or Ron Paul. They really wanted to punish the South, treat it like a captive nation. And they tried to get a lot of these punitive laws, and he was from the South. He was from Tennessee, but he didn't like some of the bills, so he was impeached. He survived it by one vote in the Senate. He survived impeachment. Then it was Bill Clinton. Now I remember this very well. I was, in my 30s. In fact, we had the organization I was affiliated with, we had a campaign to impeach him. He was impeached for the wrong reasons, and I won't go into the reasons why, because of young people here. But he should have been impeached for giving technology to hostile nations and many other things. He gave China some of the most high-tech equipment that you can imagine. You know. And then, of course, it was Donald Trump. And, you know, the second impeachment, it was such a farce that the Chief Justice would not preside. Chief Justice presides over impeachments. He's basically just there as a referee. And he said, this is such a farce, I'm not even presiding over this. So that was, you know, totally done improperly. Presidents chosen by the House of Representatives, because if no president receives a majority of electoral votes. How many electoral votes are there? Anybody know? Well, how many members of the Senate are there? Okay, how many states do we have? How many states do we have?
50.
50. 50 times 2 is? 100. And there are 435 members of the House. And Washington, D.C., under, I think it was the 24th Amendment, was able to get 3 electoral votes. So if you don't have a majority, the votes go to the House of Representatives. And they're voted by state, so the Maine delegation will vote as one. And it only happened twice. And it was close. At the election of George W. Bush the first time around, some of you weren't born then, I guess most of you weren't, but I was born. And it got down to Florida, and he won by Bush, and the Supreme Court had to decide were these votes proper. And it would have went into the House of Representatives, and it was very close. So only 2 was Thomas Jefferson, that was the first time, and this guy here, John Quincy Adams. He only served 1 term, and by the way, he was the only president to actually go into the House of Representatives after he left the White House, which is the only one to do it. Also, some of you familiar with the movie Amistad? About the slave ship? Well, it wasn't a slave ship, but it was a ship that they would capture slaves illegally. He's the one that argued in favor of their case at the Supreme Court. If you visit the Adams homestead, you will find the Bible that Sinkyu, who was a member of the crew, he was sort of the leader of the crew, presented to him. It was quite a story, yeah. So, anybody who's been to a presidential homestead? Or a library, anybody? Oh, you should put that on your homeschool itinerary. I counted up, we went to a lot of them. We've probably been to about 25 of them, maybe 30 of them. And even if I don't like the presidents, you still get good historical context. Youngest and oldest, that's Teddy Roosevelt, man on the left here. He was like a third cousin of Franklin Roosevelt. They were related, but not closely related. He was, I think, 38, and the oldest is the current president. I think he was 78 when he got elected. Ronald Reagan, you don't remember, I remember Ronald Reagan, and he was in his mid-70s when he got elected. And he would talk about the George Washington and John. He said, "I should know, I was there," joking about his age. All right, this is sort of an extra candidates for president from Maine. And no, there were some that ran in the primaries, but two, James Blaine. There's a house up here called the Blaine House. That's where the governor's mansion is. That was his house, and he ran for president unsuccessfully in 1884. And this guy here, he was mayor of Portland. He was the head of the Prohibition Party. He became head of the Prohibition Party, which means they were against alcohol. And Maine was one of the early states that banned the sale and the manufacture of alcohol. I think you could do it for your own purposes. Could you imagine a guy like that be elected to Portland mayor today? That's not likely. So, and then finally, did I have the last question? Only vice president from Maine. Anybody know? I'll cover his name up. Hannibal Ham. Now, who was he vice president? Whose vice president was he? Oh, come on. You guys are from Maine? You should all know that. I know it. I'm not from Maine. Abraham Lincoln's first vice president, yeah. And he's buried up in Bangor, Maine. You should do a term paper on this guy, you know? Yeah, he was quite an interesting guy. You don't think much of vice presidents, but if Lincoln died before that, you would have known about it, because he'd be up president, of course. All right, any questions? Well, great, thank you. I appreciate you coming. And please visit our table, and all of you will get a free pocket copy of the Constitution. And can you turn off that? Yeah. And for those of you who are watching all over the world on YouTube, our website is campconstitution.net, so visit us on the website. Thank you.